Today on CityCast DC, the Trump administration is about to reclassify tens of thousands of federal jobs so that it can treat them like patronage appointees. This is huge news for your neighbors who may have those jobs, since it will make it a lot easier to fire them for political reasons. But it's also big news for the economy of our city and, in a way, for the soul of a city that has long drawn people to public service. Drew Friedman from Federal News Network has been covering the story. She's here to explain. Today is Thursday, April 2nd. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Drew, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So you cover the federal workforce for Federal News Network. It's been a busy year and a half or so for you.
You could say that, yes.
In this time, the first year and change of Trump 2, we've seen the DOJ rampage and firings. We've seen the cuts in DEI in the federal workforce. We've seen kind of unprecedented political questions for people who've thought of themselves as disinterested public servants. But according to a lot of people, the thing that's about to happen that you've been covering may be the biggest change yet. And that is something that probably makes a lot of people's eyes glaze over. It's reclassification of people's job titles. But explain what that is and why it's important.
Absolutely. And yes, you're right. This is going to be a significant change for an unknown number of federal employees so far. We're still waiting to see some of the details here. But essentially what this does is take people who have been in career positions, meaning they're not political appointees, and convert them into a new classification of employment that removes a lot of their job protections. This would make a federal employee easier to fire for any reason. They wouldn't be able to appeal their reclassification to begin with. They would see some changes in whistleblower protections and many other changes. But, I will say this is something that has been a long time coming. We saw it in Trump's first term. So it's not necessarily surprising things are going this way, but it feels like we're kind of on the verge of that cliff, so to speak.
So for those of us who live in Washington, it really feels like a change in the deal that has defined the lives of a lot of our neighbors, where the kind of core of that work may not have been huge money, but it was good money and it was stability. As you noted, this is a thing that Trump and the people around him have been after since his first term. He created an executive order, which was then rescinded by Biden. Can you just sort of walk us through the quick history of that?
Yes. So what happened is in Trump's first term, it was at the very end of Trump's first term when he issued an executive order on Schedule F. It was about October of 2020. So it really only gave agencies a couple of months before to implement it. And so for that reason, and because we had Biden coming in just a few months after that, it never really took off. And once Biden was in office, he rescinded that executive order. A couple years later, in 2024, there was a final regulation from the Biden administration's OPM that attempted to sort of enshrine or further protect these civil service protections for career employees. And since then, what we saw in Trump's second term was first an executive order bringing this back. Again, that was something we expected. There was then some OPM or Office of Personnel Management guidance. So we saw some more details come out on, what types of positions this is going to target and more about the expectations there. But it took a while for this to go through the regulatory process, too. So it wasn't until last month in February when we saw a final rule come out. And now just really the last step in the process here to make this all official is having President Trump sign an executive order.
So this had been called, when they first tried to do it, Schedule F, which sounds really innocuous. But what it basically meant was there's this other category of federal employees that is not eligible for a lot of the protections and stability that we associate with federal work. This time they've changed the name to Schedule/Career. but it's basically the same thing. Who is in this category?
That's a great question. And the short answer is we don't yet know. Uh, the types of positions that the Trump administration says are going to go into this category are what they call policy influencing positions. Now, this, if I could just step into the weeds here a little bit, this aligns.
I love it in the weeds.
This aligns with a terminology from a law from 1978 called the Civil Service Protection Act. And it covers employees who are in confidential policy determining, policy making, and policy advocating natures. So that's a pretty generalized term, but and I guess that gives the flexibility to the Trump administration to have that be pretty sweeping, pretty broad ranging for federal employees here. So what they're essentially going to do is look at, agencies are expected to kind of look at their positions, their employees, and see who fits into this broad category, and then send their recommendations to the president. But it's up to Trump to make that final list and those final conversions there.
Oh, so there is a lawsuit.
Yes. There is a lawsuit. It was first filed pretty much immediately after the day one executive order from President Trump on schedule policy career. It was updated in early March. And this is a lawsuit coming from a coalition of public service organizations and federal unions. And they're essentially alleging violations in three broad buckets of what is the issue that they're taking with schedule policy career, due process rights for federal employees, exceeding presidential authority, and contradicting federal statute. And just focusing in on that last piece, I think is pretty important there. So they're alleging violations of the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act. What that law did was establish broad civil service protections for the career federal workforce, but it did carve out a few narrow exceptions to those job protections. If you look at the 1978 law, those exceptions are exactly the area of federal jobs that the Trump administration is looking to reclassify. So that's confidential, policy determining, policy making, and policy advocating. And they shorthand it often as policy influencing. But what the law says is that those accepted positions that focus in that policy influencing area do not have the same job protections as the broader career federal workforce. The plaintiffs in the lawsuit are saying that those accepted positions are meant exclusively to refer to political appointments, not career employees, and that the schedule policy / career effort here essentially is a violation of that law because they are taking what was meant to be, in their view, something referring to exclusively political appointees, applying it to a much broader class of federal employees, of career employees.
And where's that case stand right now?
It's pending. We don't, not a lot of updates. As I mentioned, I don't think we're going to see much on this in the short term before we would probably see an executive order to make policy career official. But it's something that's been ongoing since essentially Trump took office and issued this on day one. So, I'm sure this will take a long time to play out, but it's something that's getting a lot of pushback here. Yeah.
So the kind of nightmare scenario from a lot of people who support an independent federal workforce or politically independent federal workforce is that the real goal on the right, and the Supreme Court might do this for them, is to get rid of the Civil Service Act in the first place, the one that was signed by like President Chester Alan Arthur in the 1880s or whenever. Is that like a real possibility? And what would that paint us a picture of Washington in an age of pure patronage government?
Well, under that system, federal employment was much more short-lived. You could essentially be fired, replaced for any reason. And you're seeing a lot of similarities between what existed then and it seems like what the Trump administration, at least to some, what they're trying to go back to now. So, if that did take shape, I think it would take an act of Congress to do something that significant. But, it seems like that is slowly what the Trump administration is chipping away at here.
According to the people who are pushing for this change, what's wrong with these people? Why do they need to be able to more easily move them out if they want?
A common concern that came up in the first Trump administration was this idea that the career federal workforce, so again, career are people who are federal employees who work across different administrations. They're different from a much smaller class of political appointees who you see often leading agencies. Those change over with each administration. But on the career federal workforce side, this is the 2 million civil servants that work for the government in the executive branch. There was a feeling from the Trump administration and their officials that a lot of them were slow rolling the administration's policies. They were saying that they weren't going to move forward with them. So this was, in essence, a response to that belief or that feeling that, we should have people in these decision-making, policy-making positions that are going to align with the president's priorities, that are going to push them forward. So that's kind of where it comes in. And I guess the rhetoric there is if you don't do that, if you're not going forward with these policies, we have the right then to remove you from your job and replace you with someone who will.
As a certified taco lover, I am very excited for this. District Bridge's Torre del Taco returns to DC for its 4th year. Here's how it works. From April 1st to April 30th, food lovers like me can earn points by exploring local taco and pupusa restaurants and supporting small businesses. Complete challenges in the free online game to score points and win the ultimate title of DC's Taconasaur. And new this year, in-person taco crawls in Columbia Heights, Mount Pleasant, Cleveland Park, and 14th Street, where you get to vote on your favorite and be entered to win cool swag. Sign up for free and start earning points today at districtbridges.org/Torre del Taco.
Don't miss Folger's Theaters As You Like It, playing now through April 19th at the Folger Shakespeare Library. Envisioned by artistic director Karen Ann Daniels and directed by Timothy Douglas, this vibrant production is a love note to DC with the Forest of Arden evoking the vibes, culture, and character of some of the district's favorite spaces. Featuring choreography from Tony Thomas of Folger Theater's Helen Hayes Award-winning production of Metamorphoses, and original music by Grammy Award nominee Kokai, don't miss this take on Shakespeare's playful and musical comedy. Tickets start at $20 and can be purchased online at folger.edu or by phone at 202-544-7077. Get yours today.
As much as I love springtime in DC, it also means allergy season. And as somebody with severe allergies, that means spring in DC can be rough. And did you know that if your windows are not properly installed or insulated, pollen can still make its way into your home, even if your windows are closed? So what better time to replace those busted old windows than Window Nation's The More You Buy, The More You Save sale going on now. You could save up to 50% off all the windows for your home. Window Nation's installation crews will finish the job in 1 day or less, so you can enjoy the rest of summer with minimal disruption. Best of all, they offer a lifetime warranty on all their windows, so you can relax knowing your home is protected far into the future. You better hurry because the sale ends soon. Schedule a fast, free consultation now at windownation.com.
For, in a lot of the discussion about this, the people go straight to this fear that, what if, there's been talked about 50,000 people in this category, what if they just sack them all, which seems extreme, except that Doge was all about sort of mass firings without a lot of questions being asked. Let's get down to the to the weeds a little bit more. In the event that doesn't happen, what are some of the things that they can now ask of these people? Because I've seen these stories about job applicants to ostensibly apolitical jobs being asked, do you support the president's agenda and things like that. Are these kinds of questions now things that you can be asked when you're up for promotion?
That is a little bit less clear. And a lot of the concerns that have come up from the federal community on this are that it will have essentially a chilling effect on the career civil service. So, if you are being told for years, for decades, you've been in this career job where you have job protections, you receive notice if there's going to be any termination, suspension, any issue with your employment. Now you're being told, okay, you don't have any of those protections anymore. And I think there's concerns there about how that's going to affect your day-to-day work and your day-to-day operations. You might change the way that you respond to different policies, different executive orders. You might be concerned or more hesitant to speak up if you see wrongdoing in your agency because you fear some sort of retaliation there. So those are some of the changes that you might see, and that's not necessarily things that are on paper, but that's the broader idea of how this could affect someone's day-to-day work. And again, as you mentioned, this is a lot more leaning a lot more towards senior level, higher level employees, people who've been there for a long time. And I guess on the other end of things too is there's concerns that if there are people who end up getting fired from this and replaced with people who are going to continue with the Trump administration's policies and kind of push forward without questioning things, then that could lead to a loss of expertise in the government, lead to declines in services. So there's any number of ripple effects that could come from this.
I've always thought of political appointees as, they can get rid of them for any reason they want. I don't like the way you dress. I don't like the cut of your jib. Are these people who might be pushed into this category protected by the kind of regular things that you and me, people in the private sector, are protected by, like matters of protected status, race, ethnicity, gender, protections against retaliation, or is all that gone?
Those sorts of broader reasons to be fired for discrimination or things like that those are still protections that those employees would have. It doesn't necessarily take away that aspect of it. But you're right that it's going to essentially make these employees have similar job protections to existing political appointees. So you can't be fired for cause. You become an at-will employee in some sense. Yeah.
So I grew up a child of two federal workers. If you live in Washington, a lot of your neighbors probably are. These are people who pride themselves on sort of a certain amount of expertise, on devoting themselves to the country and not sweating too much about who happens to be in charge after an election. I would imagine this is just an enormous impact on how these employees see themselves on a day-to-day basis. You're out there reporting on this world. Talk to me about people's morale.
In a word, it's diminished. It's declined significantly. Normally, in most years, the government surveys federal employees on how they're feeling, how engaged they are in their work, how satisfied they are in their jobs. It's called the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. This is an annual government-wide survey where you assess how the federal workforce is feeling. In 2025, the Trump administration chose not to run the survey. So we are missing a lot of data on what was a very significant year of change, of turmoil, essentially for federal employees. In place of that, we've seen some external surveys of federal employees showing that, morale is way down. They feel like they're not able to do their jobs as they would normally because they're, so concerned or so distracted from everything else that's been going on. I think it's fair to say that this has had an immense impact on federal employees.
These stories about people being asked political questions when they're up for that kind of thing, what are the kinds of questions people are being asked that didn't used to get asked?
One thing we've seen, this comes up in hiring for the federal government. There were some essay questions that were added to all federal job applications, asking employees or people who want to join the government, do you support the president's priorities? What's your favorite executive order from President Trump? There's certainly concern there that this is, just bleeding into what's supposed to be a nonpartisan, career civil service that's, acting across administrations and implementing any president's priorities, whoever is in power, as long as, of course, they're lawful. But this is something that comes up time and again, where we see the language of the president's priorities being a top concern for whether it's job promotions, whether it's how you are assessed on a performance review, whether it's when you're being hired at the outset. It's something that has come up in a lot of the personnel language that the Trump administration's been using.
So I'm going to ask the sort of local yokel question here, which is, in Washington, so many of the people, there's a lot going on in Washington that's not the federal government, and federal workers that's not all the jobs or even most of the jobs in the district. But a lot of the people who move here, historically and continuing, are people who first came for a federal job. And what I hear you saying is that the kind of nature of federal work, that even the questions you're asked on the front end are changing in ways that I can imagine, a lot of talented people who sort of think of themselves as patriots or, professionals would be kind of turned off by that sort of question and maybe wouldn't want to come work in the first place for the federal government. Is there a sense that this is going or has already impacted the caliber of or the number of people who want to do federal work in the first place?
I think it's certainly possible. We've seen such a scaling down of the amount of hiring the federal government normally does that I don't think at this point we have a good read on, how many applications are coming in now as a fair comparison to past years. But I would say it will absolutely have an effect. Coming back to these job protections, if you've seen the Trump administration for more than a year now, encouraging employees to leave their jobs, to some extent, in some places, firing employees as well, that's going to have an impact on how you see job security. Whereas federal employment for a long time was seen as these are secure jobs, these are, important jobs to public service. Now I think the narrative may be changing to some extent.
Right. And it's a funny thing. Like if you're a bank that's in the business of giving people loans for a home purchase, all of a sudden that person with a federal job looks like less of a sure thing than they once were.
That's right. Yeah. One other thing to, I think, keep in mind, especially about the DC area too, is one statistic that comes up a lot in my world and my reporting is people say that actually more than 85% of federal employees are outside the DC area.
Yes.
I think that's important to keep in mind too, is that yes, there is a concentration of federal employees here and federal contractors by extension, but they exist everywhere in every community across the country and overseas as well.
It is true. And there's millions who work for the federal government. A lot of them are in the military. A lot of them are all over the place. But we're talking about a more narrow category here. This group of people, size is not yet quite clear, who are in senior policy influencing jobs. I would imagine that group is disproportionately close to headquarters, therefore DC. Do we have a sense of how many there are total and how many maybe in DC or the DC area?
These, higher level employees, yes, there is a concentration more of the senior executives because just by nature, you're near the headquarters offices, you're doing more of that policy type work here in the DC area. So yes, naturally, you would have more of those senior level positions in DC. I don't have a specific number on that, but yes, there is a concentration in that sense of, it's possible that schedule policy / career will apply and target more specifically employees in this area.
So the District of Columbia alone lost, according to the chief financial officer, 22,000 federal jobs. They've predicted roughly that number again in the next few years. Are people's predictions for that changing based on this executive order and this change in classification?
Well, I think it's important to say, I guess, that just because these employees get reclassified doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be fired. Absolutely. We can't just translate that in that way, but I would say there's more possibility for it if those employees are, for any number of reasons, determined not to be in the Trump administration's eyes carrying out their duties or their job responsibilities. Then yes, I think we could see more of that in this area.
So before I let you go, talk to me about now what the next concrete steps are and whether this is all going to get passed without people turning to the courts and seeking to have judges stop it.
There is a lawsuit against the schedule policy / career. I don't imagine that we're going to see action on that necessarily before we see this executive order from the president. But if you're looking at next steps for implementation, what it will be is that executive order from the president that says, I've gotten all of agencies' recommendations and plans for who's going to be reclassified. That executive order that is forthcoming would make all of those reclassifications official.
And what's the ETA on that, as far as we know?
It could have been as early as March 9th. So it's been several weeks and we haven't seen anything come out yet. It's fair to say there are a lot of other things going on in the world right now. So maybe it's not the top priority right now to get this finalized, but I would imagine we'll see it relatively soon. Yeah, if you look back to February, that's when we saw the final rule come out on this, and that's where we got all the details of, how this is going to go into effect. What are the changes to the more specific changes to personnel, policies and their job protections. And, so now maybe close to 2 months out from that, we'll see it relatively soon. And I think it's also important to say that it might not just be one executive order. That will be the initial round, but it's possible this could be expanded later on. The 50,000 number gets thrown around a lot for, an estimate of how many people can be reclassified. But if you look at the regulations, there is no real limit on it. So it's possible that maybe it will start with that much. Maybe it will grow. There have been estimates that it could be as much as 200,000 employees. So it's hard to say at this point how broad it will be. But given what we've seen from the Trump administration, I'd imagine it might be on the upper end of that.
Drew, I'm wondering, you work for the Federal News Network, you cover the federal workforce and the federal government as almost like a business. How has your work changed in the last year and a half, in the face of the firings and the sense of trying to make it easier to push people out? I would imagine that might zip up a lot of people's lips. On the other hand, imagine maybe it makes a lot of people mad who then want to talk to you. Talk to me about your work.
I would say it's changed a lot. The first several months of the administration, everything was very fast paced, very chaotic, trying to understand, and make sense of how all this is coming together. And I focus a lot on how is this going to impact federal employees? What is the bottom line for them? That's changed a lot in terms of, trying to figure out the answer to that. People are willing to talk. I think at first there was a lot of fear of retaliation, a fear of exposure, but that has been changing over time. I don't know if that's a mark of, those people are no longer in their positions, or it's just a slow growing comfort with speaking more to the media. But I try to be as informational, as detailed as I can about everything.
Hey, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.